Thank you so much for being here. It's a great pleasure. First and foremost, I am from Venezuela. My dad used to be from Argentina. My grandfather was from Italy. My mother was from Spain, which means that I have in my blood all the past, present, and future populists of humankind. So one thing that I want to do is, and by the way, I became a US citizen in 2009, so you can blame me for Trump as well. One thing that I would like to do is to talk a little bit about what has happened to Venezuela and why we are where we are. This is kind of my interpretation. So I'm going to summarize 50 years of history in about 15 minutes. Then I would like to talk a little bit about what are the challenges that Venezuela is facing moving ahead. And I think that in order to actually move forward in Venezuela, it is very important that we have return of democracy and the return of the respect of institutions that we have actually been violating for more than 10 years. I mean, it has become apparent that this has been taking place in the last 6 months, but this is going on for much longer. So first, Venezuela. Venezuela was a country that was extremely open. Between 1936 and 1965, that was the fastest growing country on earth, the second lowest inflation rate on earth, was the second lowest interest rate on earth. We had zero fiscal deficit, there was no debt of the government, and we have good weather. So I don't know, but that sounds like the definition of paradise. And truly, why I'm highlighting that period? Because in that period, the way Venezuela grew was with a relatively small government, and it was the pursuit of private sector. So it was a very pro-private sector, pro-immigration. We more than quadrupled our population in the time. It's not because we were having a lot of babies, it's because all of us were coming from different countries, and they were all welcome, no questions asked. You can ask Venezuelans, and they will be 2 or 3 generations foreigners. So what happened is that there were a sequence of events in between 1965 and 1980 that changed dramatically the contract between the governments and the societies. So first one was an oil price increase that very few people know that happened in 1965. The price of oil increased from $1.3 a barrel. Imagine how stupid that price used to be. Is that okay? But that increased from 1.3 to about $3. So we more than doubled the price of oil, and that started making the government much bigger. By 1973, that price increased again to almost $25. Came down a little bit, and then by 1979, that number went up to 40. So if we had the third largest per capita income in 1965 with oil prices at 1.3, can you imagine how it felt in 1979? That's when I started going to the university. So I remember actually studying electrical engineer. By the way, Rafael Raif used to be at my university, Universidad Simón Bolívar at that time, a little bit before that. And I do remember asking the faculty, said, we don't have anyone that is going to teach us microwaves. I want to learn about the transmission of microwaves. And then the administration said, okay, we will just bring an MIT faculty to teach for 3 months here with a translator. And they paid that faculty in 3 months, 2 years of salary. So in fact, I'm pretty sure that every faculty at MIT will say yes to that transaction. So we had infinite amount of money, but truly more than money, what we had was a change in the power in the society. The government became incredibly powerful. And from a society that we were kind of highlighting private sector, we became a society mostly to share the rents. The rents were too big, and therefore we were mostly concentrated about how to share that. And we made many mistakes since 1965 moving forward. I want to concentrate on 1981. In 1981, this is just before oil prices come down from that level of 40. Venezuela had poverty levels of about 3%. That's it. Oil prices come down from about $40 to $8. So it's a massive shock to the economy. And in fact, we did a sequence of very bad policies, one after the other. We didn't know how to rewrite the social contract that we have written. And in some sense, we just reacted very badly to those shocks. By 1998, so by the way, almost everybody was dissatisfied. So we had coup attempts, we had governments that were impeached, so almost everybody was upset. By 1998 is when Chavez, who had organized a coup attempt about 6 years before that, runs for president. Something very important is that in Venezuela at that time, you could only vote if you were older than 18 years old. So by construction, everyone that is voting in 1998 was born before 1980, which means that everyone that is voting actually lived a Venezuela of extreme levels of income with no poverty. But 1989, our poverty level was 29%. So in a span of 18 years, we put about 1/4 of our population into poverty. So not even on purpose you can do it. So this needs a massive degree of incompetence. So not surprisingly, when Chavez says that he thinks that the institutions have failed, a lot of Venezuelans agree with that diagnostic. And he wins a very contested election. So there were 3 very important candidates, and each one actually gets about 1/3. He just got a little bit more than 1/3. I think he won the elections with 36%, so a tiny, tiny proportion. And what happened after he takes government is that at the beginning, he had a destructive agenda. And in fact, most of you that actually are paying attention to politics today, you will realize that populists tend to just offer destructive agendas. They love to say the things that they don't like, okay? I don't like foreigners. I don't like the NAFTA. I don't like the rich. So they tell you what they don't like. So it's all destructive agendas. They never tell you what they are going to build. They never tell you what is the vision of a country. They tell you what are the aspects that they don't like. And because we are very upset with the circumstance, it resonates a lot with us. So it's very easy for us to say, well, I agree. I mean, the United States is not doing that well, so something must be wrong, and this person is telling me that what is wrong are all these international agreements that we have and the fact that China is making our life miserable. It might be the case. I have no idea if this is good or bad. I don't have someone in JPAL doing an experiment to check whether or not trade explains that. And therefore, because I don't have that answer, then why not? Why not try it? The previous person failed. Why not try another one? And truly, that attitude is something that populists abuse tremendously. They tell us what they dislike, and unfortunately, a lot of us agree with that. And this happens, I would say, in every country nowadays. And the populists are of 2 types. The populists of the right always hate a foreigner, so they are always against immigration. The populists of the left always dislike a sector, or so they assign it, well, it's either the pharmaceutical sector that is bad one. By the way, nowadays, the bad ones are Uber, Apple, Google, I mean, all of those. In fact, the new motto for the people that hate Google is that Google used to say, do no evil, and then they scratch the no, clearly. But truly, this is more or less what was happening in Venezuela. Chavez wins the election, and it takes about 2 years for Chavez to tell the U.S., to tell the Venezuelan population what he wanted to build. And that's when the Venezuelans disagreed. So we were okay with a destructive agenda to change the institutions, but we severely disagree on several aspects. For example, he wanted equality and the quality of education. And I think that every Venezuelan agreed with that. But the way he wanted to achieve equality was by not allowing private schools to teach languages, not allowing private schools to teach computers or science. Well, so equating equality to the lowest level is not what the society wanted. So truly, there were many, many aspects of the society that he wanted to build that Venezuelans disagree. Venezuelans organized different type of waves of protest through all these years. And those protests has become more and more violent through time, and the reaction of the government has become more and more violent. The U.S. foreign policy did not help. The U.S. is not an expert in having good foreign policy. We kind of suck at it. And in fact, I will always say that the US will benefit tremendously of taking the first two classes of foreign policy, which is one is use common sense, and the second one, if you made a mistake, don't repeat it. These are the first two classes. You can summarize in 30 seconds. But actually, the US have never taken those two classes. So the US did not help in the process, and it became very clear that the US was associated as the enemy. So therefore, whatever bad was happening to the Venezuelan, it was very easy for the government to say, well, you are entitled to a better standard of living. The problem is that the US is just taking that away from you. And it became a very powerful enemy. And the rhetoric, not only that, the rhetoric was against the United States and was against the private sector. And through years, Chavez actually kind of implemented policies and implemented practices that deteriorated and expropriated the private sector throughout. And we continue to have far more poverty. By 2012, poverty levels in Venezuela are about 45%. So this process was not. We have put half of our population almost half of our population in poverty, and this is 2012, before the oil prices collapsed in 2014. So, okay, that's why I'm stopping there. By the way, that was the last time we measured poverty, so we truly have no idea today. What has happened recently? I'm gonna oversimplify the situation. I'm an economist, so we oversimplify everything. Just so I apologize. Actually, I don't apologize. So I'm just telling you I'm gonna oversimplify like crazy. But I want to explain a little bit why we have two individuals that claim to be the president and why we have two groups of people that claim to be the Congress, okay? Because this sounds like very weird. Like this usually doesn't happen in normal countries. So how does that happen? And so I want to explain a little bit, and you will see kind of the process of deterioration of and the destruction of institutions. So Chavez dies, and then the vice president, which was Nicolas Maduro, becomes the president. We have elections, and in that elections, actually, Maduro won by a tiny, tiny, tiny advantage. In fact, there were evidence that there was some fraud, but the opposition decides to respect the outcome of the election. They said, you know what? This was too close. We know that there's evidence of fraud. We are not going to complain. We need to pacify the country, so let's move on. By the way, they won with 50.1%, so there's 49.9% that disagree. So they were expecting that the government of Maduro was going to move toward the center, okay? So toward a more reasonable policy, more inclusive policy. That did not happen. 2 years later, we have elections in Congress. And actually, that Congress, which I'm going to call Congress, is called the National Assembly, but just to have a conversation, I'm going to call it Congress. Is that clear? The other one I'm going to call the Constitutional Assembly, so you're not confused. Is that okay? And we Venezuelans, we speak very fast, and I don't know if you have noticed, but I have like a tiny, tiny accent. Yeah, it's because I spend a lot of time in Canada. So what happened with that Congress is that actually the opposition won in that Congress. Now, immediately after winning the elections, what happens is that the government from Maduro stacks the Supreme Court and the Electoral College Council with people that support his party. By the way, the Supreme Court had already been stacked through years by Chavez, but this was like an emergency. We need to stack them even faster. So almost all the courts in the Supreme Court, the constitutional, all of them, kind of are part of all the judges are Chavez supporters or Maduro supporters. So when the new Congress takes over, what occurs is that now there's a fight between the executive and Congress, and in this fight, what the president does is, by decree, starts to eliminate powers of Congress. Now, Congress says this is illegal, so we said, okay, let's go to the Supreme Court to see what they say. They go to the Supreme Court and said, oh, the executive is right. They can do that. So slowly, what they are doing is taking all the powers of that Congress. In fact, one of the things that they do is that in Venezuela, according to our law, we have the ability to rewrite the Constitution. And to do that, we create something that is called Constitutional Assembly. The Constitutional Assembly has a higher, power in the country than the Congress. And the reason why it has high power, because these guys are going to rewrite the Constitution so they can, in some sense, dismantle this Congress and call for an election. Now, according to the law, the Constitutional Assembly, the only thing that they will do is to write a constitution. I mean, they will not accept the budget or legislate or produce any law. I mean, their role there is, if you were created, you need to actually write the constitution and then we move on. By the way, the procedure is that first you call for a referendum, so you ask the citizens, do you want a new constitution? They say yes. After that, you form the Constitutional Assembly by elections, free elections, and then after you form the Constitutional Assembly, they rewrite the Constitution, then we actually put that on discussion, and then you guys vote whether or not you accept it. That's the procedure. So the first thing that Maduro said is, we're going to create the Constitutional Assembly, we don't need a referendum. Which Congress says that's illegal, they go to the Supreme Court, says that's fine. They create the Constitutional Assembly. By the way, the opposition, by saying this is illegal, the sign of protest was to not to show up. So guess what happened to the Constitutional Assembly? It's elected and there's full of supporters of Maduro. So now we have two, the Constitutional Assembly and the actual Congress. Now the Constitutional Assembly says, now I'm not going to write the Constitution, I'm going to start to legislate. And I'm going to actually, accept the budget and do the things that typically a Congress will do, but, it's just me. Congress says, that's illegal, let's go to the Supreme Court. No, that's okay. Okay, so that's exactly what happened. So now we had two Congresses. By the way, they meet in the same building, okay? This is like super bizarre. In the same building, two rooms next to each other. Well, we meet today in 3-220. We will meet in 2-220. So I mean, it is truly, truly bizarre. And of course, one tells the military that they have to remove the other ones because one is illegal. The other one is said, they don't have the right to call the military to be removing the other. So it's a disaster in that sense. To make this even worse, then the president decides to run for re-election. And the best way to win the elections is to put all the candidates, all the other possible candidates, in jail. I mean, it's a super good strategy. I'm just telling you, it really works really, really, really well. So he starts pursuing all the candidates on the opposition. The candidates on the opposition, either they leave the country, okay, or they are put in jail. By the way, they don't have to be in jail. You just have to find them guilty of something, and then you find evidence. Because truly, what disqualifies a person from running is that they have a guilty verdict. So you just need to say, you are guilty. Of what? I don't know. We will find an evidence later, but you're guilty. So in that sense, they were disqualifying almost all the possible candidates. Of course, almost nobody shows up for the elections. He wins the elections, Maduro. Those elections, every country on earth, this 2 years ago, every country on earth has kind of agreed that those elections were rigged. And after that, what happens is that the Congress, the original one, okay, goes through the process. It says, first, procedure A was violated, procedure B was violated, procedure C was violated. They go through the documenting all the violations that took place. And therefore, by the law, it says, well, the president-elect is not legitimate, so we have to call for new elections. The vice president is not legitimate, so we have to call for elections. So we have what is called a transitory president or interim president. And that's actually what Guaido is. So it took a while to go through that process of documenting all the violations that took place. And that's more or less what happens. In January of this year, Guaido kind of is sworn into power, and now we have two presidents. Well, actually, I don't see it that way, but yes, we have two presidents. Why I'm telling you this story? I hope that you have heard from this story that there's no right or left discussion here. This is not about Trump supporting or not supporting. This is not about right wing, left wing. Actually, Guaido, the president, he's a left wing. Now, of course, in comparison to Maduro, everybody's a right-wing freak, okay? I just want to let you know that you all will look like Nazis in front of him. So he's just like too far extreme. But it's truly not about a right versus left. And by the way, again, the United States, with the claims and the way they're making the claims, are not helping the situation, because they're almost implicitly saying we are here to save you, and the previous president did not save you. There were different conditions. But it is not helping. It is truly not helping, because then we have a discussion, should I support or not Guaido? Is almost like saying, well, should I support or not Trump? And that's not the point. The government of Venezuela is a criminal government right now. Yes, it is a government in which first it's behaving like a de facto dictatorship, but it's a very strange dictatorship, because the power does not reside on the dictator. I mean, most of the dictators, they typically have the power, but this is not the case. This is a person that has no power. I mean, I'm pretty sure he has only one neuron, so he can either breathe or think. So, he's that's it, gone the thought. Okay, so this is it. So the power is not on Maduro. Venezuela is a collection of different groups that are struggling for this power. So we have one very important group, which are all the drug cartels, and that has one side of the government, very powerful. And I mean, the head of the Congress will be kind of the leader of that group. You have another group that is about terrorist organizations that are kind of supported by the terrorist organizations in Colombia. You have another group and different interests that, for example, are coming from Russia has a lot of economic interest in Venezuela. China has a lot of economic interest in Venezuela. After a failed coup attempt in 2012, what the government in Venezuela did was to remove all the intelligence from the Venezuelan military, and then they actually got the Cubans' intelligence to support Venezuela. So they also have a lot to say. So in this power struggle, you just have a government that is factions of the government are just fighting with each other. It just happens to be that Maduro is the person in the middle, kind of stretching to all these places. And why this matters is because the resolution of Venezuela is not, it is not exclusively achieved by the removal of the president. It's much, much harder than that. So in fact, I think that the next steps have to understand that we probably need to form coalitions with groups that we will not form any coalition whatsoever. And that those coalitions will have to be formed with organizations that we are not very proud of. But the only way to move forward, I think, is that we just become very pragmatic in those moments. So let me tell you a little bit about, by the way, these groups have a lot to lose if there's a change in the government. A lot to lose. So if you pardon Maduro, that's an irrelevant act, okay? So the military, all of them have a stake in this organization. So let me just tell you a little bit about, just in time. So let me just tell you a little bit about what I think is moving forward. So I think the situation is spiraling down to zero. The economic collapse is actually unique. In 3 years, the GDP of Venezuela has dropped by 50%. That has only happened with war. We have not had war yet. So this is just an absolute self-destructive process. We have electricity only 2 hours a day, if you're lucky. We have no water. I mean, you will have water 1 day a week. We have no food. That used to be subsidized by the Chavez government, but they are running out of money, so they are not subsidizing. So now it has become a humanitarian situation. People are leaving. Countries like Colombia have received about 1.3 million Venezuelans. Almost all of them that they received. By the way, if anyone is from Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Panama here in the audience, on behalf of Venezuela, thank you so much. Thank you tremendously. When my dad left Argentina, he left Argentina because his family was persecuted by Perón. He arrived in Venezuela as a 16-year-old with no education, and Venezuela received my dad and my mother. My mother arrived when she was 12 after the civil war in Spain, and Venezuela received both of them and provided them housing and opportunities, and I am here thanks to all those opportunities. And one amazing thing that happened to my father and my mother is that they absolutely loved Venezuela. They absolutely fell in love with Venezuela. And the expression that my mother had was that, well, one saw me birth and the other one saw me grow up. And for her, those were her two nations. So all those countries, in some sense, are doing a massive effort absorbing all the Venezuelans that are escaping. They're walking. They arrive to these places very sick. I work a lot with law enforcement, and one of the things that I do is to measure the price of criminal behavior, or for things that we're not very proud. Just to give you an idea, the price of prostitution in Cucuta, which is the city neighboring Venezuela, this is more or less where half of the Venezuelans are escaping right now, the price of prostitution is $1. $1. So I just want you to imagine the amount of desperation and despair that you probably will ever require to sell yourself at $1. The minimum wage in Venezuela right now is $6 a month. So this is an extraordinary humanitarian situation that truly is going to end very badly. I actually think it's going to end very badly because you have the two sides are playing a chicken game to see who blinks first. So I think the biggest challenges when that transition takes place, and I hope it takes, the sooner it takes, the better, because I think that we need to actually restore access to very basic things. When people ask me, what will you provide to people? My list is food, medicine, electricity, and water. You understand that this is what we used to think in the Middle Age. So when we were in the 1200, those were the problems that our governments had. How to provide this, well, not electricity, but very basic goods. And we just cannot provide them in Venezuela right now. So we need to actually change this. So we need to provide a vision of what is the country we're going to build, not necessarily what we're going to destroy. That's the first point. It has to be very heroic. In the sense, I have a very friend, this is a statement from a very close friend, but his view is that we actually have to feel that we have the opportunity to create a nation from almost zero, and that therefore that we have the challenge to be able to do that. How many of us will actually pay to have the chance to rebuild the electricity production of a country from zero? I mean, this thing about CO2, we might actually be able to deal with it from the design, from the ground up. So there's a lot of opportunities that hopefully people like you and J-Pal and that are all over the world will have the courage to take on those tackle and those challenges and solve and provide good advice about how to build a better country. But hopefully the Venezuelans that are there will feel proud about the possibilities of what we can build if we can move. The biggest challenge, unfortunately, is that the day the transition takes over, we have truly no idea about the state of the economy, nor how much power we will truly have. So for example, I'm working closely with a professor in Harvard. His name is Ricardo Hausman, and we're kind of trying to think about, with a lot of help of other people, so there's a lot of people helping here. But questions like, for example, how many pensioners you have, we have no idea. And it's not like the number is between 3 million and 3.1 million. No. The number is between 3 million and 5.5. So we have no idea. And the reason is because one year there were 5.5 million people collecting, the following year only 3.5. So either 2 million people died, or, I mean, like, what happened to the others? I mean, we have no clue. How many employees in the government? Any number between 2 million and 4.5 million. Do you understand the level of uncertainty is just humongous? When we ask people how much it will cost to repair electricity, well, 0.5 billion or 7 billion. So can you give me a range that sounds like normal? By the way, our GDP in the country is about $50 billion. So this is 10% of the GDP will be devoted to repair electricity, or 1%. It's a big difference. We have no clue. We have no clue. Furthermore, we have no clue about the support of law enforcement. So when the new president comes and he stands there and says, I am the new president-elect, will the police say, okay, you are my president? Will the military say, yes, you are my president? So truly to me, what I am obsessed is governability. Is that once the transition takes place, how on earth we make it to the next following week? How will we make it to next Friday? And I understand that this sounds a little bit short-termish, and I know it sounds short-termish, but truly, we have people that require food, medicine, water, and with $6 a month, they cannot afford it. And I cannot pay them more. So this is one of the very few instances in which a country has to stabilize a country with inflation. It's just like a bizarre case in economics. I don't think actually I have ever found it. Because we need wage inflation in dollars. We need, $6 is not the opportunity cost of the Venezuelans. But right now, we cannot afford that just out of subsidies. So Venezuela will need a lot of international help, and not military help. It's actually actual help of people that are willing to put resources. And the way I think about it is that we, as the international community, we're purchasing the right and the option to build a better country. And I think that that's actually worth trying. I do think that Venezuela is condemned to success. And the reason is there's something special about that population. I am not part of that. Actually, I'm part of the guys that you could blame of this disaster. But these are young kids like you that suddenly decide to say, I'm going to show up on Memorial Drive. And you tell this to everybody, that you're going to show up at Memorial Drive on a Saturday at 2 p.m. The government that has these hordes of people that they call, doesn't matter what the name is, these are like a paramilitary, that they are in bikes and they have guns and they shoot at people in Memorial Drive. So this is a society that says, we will meet at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. We tell that to the world. These guys, the colectivos, they know we're going to show up at 2. We show up at 2. We know that they're going to shoot to the young people. So we still show up. They shoot, and they still there. These are the kids, like that guy. These are the kids that show up on those parades. So a society that has the willingness to put themselves at risk without even shooting a single bullet, it's a society that has a sense of sacrifice that is particularly unique. That's what gives me all the hope. We just need the chance. Let me stop there. Thank you so much. Yes.
Hi, thanks. I'm sorry to get here late. I was eager to hear what you would have to say about the situation, which obviously isn't a good one. But first of all, I wonder, as an economist and from an analytical point of view, you talked about the self-destructiveness of the current government, which I'm not disputing. But what is your assessment of the role of the U.S., call it a war against the current government, the sanctions, and the impact that that has had in helping to create the situation and intensify it and make it difficult, even more difficult, for it to be addressed? That's one thing. But also, do you not think, and I thought I heard you say military is not the way to go. Are you clear?
No, I don't want it, yeah.
Yeah, so you're not in favor of U.S., certainly military intervention.
No, I will let me, so indeed I think I said something about the U.S. foreign policy in these 20 years have not been very helpful in general. Now I want you to make the following. Think about the following, okay? So you are in an island, and you have spent 18 years alone in an island, and you are, hungry and sick, and then somebody, a guy with orange skin, arrives, okay, in a boat and says, "Do you want to ride?" What will you say? Take me, my friend. I mean, like you said, I would pick anyone. Are you drunk? Yes, I'm drunk. It's okay. I mean, what is the worst that can happen? I mean, you understand that the problem of Venezuela right now and the opposition is complete, absolute despair. So he said, just throw me anything. So kind of part of, I will say that most Venezuelans will disagree 100% with the values that the US government and White House has today. But it's the guy that show up with a boat. What do you want me to do? To wait another 18 years? So one thing I want to say is that I would love to actually redesign the help of the United States to be much productive. But what happened in this particular circumstance is that it just arrived at a certain time and they just piggyback on that. But it could have been done much, much better. Now, the embargo is not helping the situation. Of course it's not. And it's actually punishing the wrong people because it's punishing the citizens. And these criminals in government, they don't care about the citizens. So we are punishing the wrong individuals. So I will design it differently. So I hope that you understand that. I will design it differently. But I also want you to put yourself in the position of the leadership on the opposition of Venezuela. I mean, this is the only vote that have showed. I mean, what do you want me to do? I mean, I disagree, but I understand why these guys said, yes, throw me anything. And the guy says, I have horrible views, and I hate you, by the way. Yeah, great, but you are taking me out of this island.
But is there not a pathway to some kind of negotiated? Aren't some governments are calling for, are offering to help with the negotiated? I mean, it's not just one, it's not a universe. I mean, as you pointed out, there are significant differences in the society. Groups that are aligned with the current government. How do you acknowledging that instead of like let's have it out, try to bring those different sides together for a negotiated settlement.
So I also have a question from the web audience. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. So the question is, can there be any type of negotiation? This has been 18 years of negotiations. 18 years. And 18 years in which there's fraud. I have written papers about the frauds and found evidence of the fraud, okay? So fraud, we said, okay, let's negotiate. Venezuela is a very peaceful country, extremely peaceful country. And the society is extremely peaceful. It's really difficult to negotiate with someone that is just an individual that doesn't care. By the way, the support of the Maduro government is tiny. I mean, it's not 30%. I mean, forget about that. But in fact, the fact that more than 2 million people have left the country is about 10% of the Venezuelan population. And he even have to require the Cuban intelligence to be able to support his government. He doesn't even trust his own intelligence. So the support is very small. But these criminal groups, what I said at the beginning, these criminal groups that are sustaining the government have a lot to lose by giving up. And therefore, they will do whatever it takes to sustain it. Very difficult to have a negotiated agreement. And I think the opposition has tried many, many times. The Latin American countries, some of them have tried many, many times. But today, actually, if I put all the Latin American countries together, they will not be able, truly, they will not be able to garnish enough support to change. By the way, the only way to change is that China and Russia says enough. Truly, it's not about the US. Truly here is about the China and Russia saying enough. You need to change. And that's so it's actually on the other side. And again, this is a humanitarian crisis that the government is actually fostering. So they don't care. By the way, the opposition has made many mistakes as well. So, yeah. Yes, is there a question online? No. Okay, yes.
Thank you so much for this talk. So you mentioned that in the future, whenever there's a transition, there is a need for good public policies and experts to kind of rush in and help. But we don't know when that transition might take place or if it will take place anytime soon. What can public policy, what can evidence, data decisions, public policy, what can that do now in the shortest term possible? Is there any room at all for policies and for empirical evidence to help this very complicated and very difficult situation?
So the question is if you guys can do something today. That's the short way to say the same question. For example, I do think that the problems of Venezuela are not exclusively economics or policy. There's a tremendous divide in Venezuela, which is not about the color of your skin, it's about some confused ideology. And so resolving that conflict and that hate is something that I think we need to actually study today. The day the transition takes over, there's going to be a lot of resentment. I mean, so this has hit everybody. If you ask any Venezuelan, they will have some story similar to what I'm going to tell you. But a very close friend of my sister-in-law, she had twins, premature twins, on the day where we have 72 hours of no electricity. Well, one of her babies died. I think it's really difficult for me to tell her to be patient, understanding, and forgiving. I have 3 kids. I don't know how in fact, I thank God that I have not actually been put in that place, but I really don't know how I will react. I can be as rational as you want, except that that day I will probably be a little bit irrational. So, because almost every Venezuelan had that story, that transition, that cohesion in the society, we have to find a way how to achieve that. So before we fix electricity and how important roads are and improving education system, which are all very important, it's about actually how we can rebuild a society that was super open with tremendous amount of social mobility, tremendous amount of understanding. Talk to any Venezuelan that you know that is relatively old, has gray hair, and ask them about how we refer to our friends, what are the words that we use, what was the women empowerment. You understand that Venezuela was the first country on earth that had a president of the central bank that was a woman. First one, ever. When I was in government in Venezuela, the most powerful person in the country was not the president, it was a lady in Congress. So women empowerment, I never heard about women not being empowered. In fact, I never heard about that. Because in my country, when people show up in the 1940s, they show up and said, we want to build a better country where women are empowered. It was a non-issue. So we need to get back to that. Because whatever policy you do, if you have the country that is totally divided and they hate each other, I don't know what we can do. And that we can actually start doing now. What is required? And I don't know if that will be, that to me it sounds like public policy, but somehow we have to figure out that answer, and I have no idea. So this is a question for anthropologists, for sociologists. I mean, something that ends on ologist, but not economist. It needs an L somewhere. Yes?
I think this is a bit far off in the horizon, but in terms of rebuilding the nation, obviously, if you rebuild it economically, that will yield to some form of capital accumulation, and it might create a divide in the future. Have you guys started talking about how to prevent this in this new, how to prevent a situation like this happening again in Venezuela, and also how to, basically that.
Yeah. So the easy answer, I have not. I really hope that there is a moment in which I can start thinking about income inequality and redistribution. So I really, really hope that time presents itself. I think that the mistakes that we made is that we took all of this for granted. So for the Mexicans and for anyone, for the Austrians, for the Italians, for the Spanish, don't take your institutions for granted. I mean, the best way is to actually be very, very committed to that. So we are the ones that didn't show up to vote. We were the ones that, we wanted to take shortcuts. It's my generation. My generation is the one that screwed it up. Now, my generation is the one that we were so incredibly rich that we assumed that that was going to stay forever. And we behaved like that, and we took our democracy was super vibrant. We assumed it was never going to be challenged. Never. I mean, never, and never, never. You can ask, again, any Venezuelan that has gray hair. We took this for granted. And we thought that if Chavez was going to do something, it was just pure talk. We never thought that this was going to happen. Never. And by the way, everybody in Latin America has the Chavez recipe now. Okay? And they are all implementing it. And in Mexico has implemented in 6 months way more than Venezuela did in 3 years. Because now you know what the recipe is, so you just go and implement it very fast. So please don't take it for granted. It's kind of an important lesson. So I think that I don't know if we're going to repeat the mistakes, but I can assure you the Venezuelans, the young generations, are not going to do this. I mean, I think it's hard to find any other form of commitment stronger than showing up in a bridge when you know they're going to shoot at you. I mean, that has to be the definition of commitment, no?
Would you consider something like banning, I don't know, or controlling some form of like intellectual dishonesty in public, like in media by people in the public sector or something like that? Because I think
intellectual dishonesty in politics.
Yes.
Okay, that will be something for data and decisions to measure. That will be a tough one. I would like citizens to take responsibility on their own future. And this is what we didn't do. A dishonest politician is only effective when the population decides not to study. When somebody, it's just very simple. When somebody says, don't buy Chinese, buy Walmart, I mean, just look at the label, you idiot. I mean, like, this is a simple data point. So when that statement actually, the people says, oh yeah, my God, you have the president you deserve. This is kind of my view. If you voters do not take ownership of the country you want to build, then if you have an idiot, you deserve it. And we in Venezuela, we deserve it. We didn't look, we didn't turn the label. We forgot to look and turn the label. So these are not banning stupid statements. I think what you have to do is to make sure that we citizens do not react to stupid statements. And therefore, we have the responsibility. So they will disappear just by the fact that we will not pay attention. By the way, what I'm describing is happening in every country on earth. Yeah. Extreme statements are well received in every single country in Europe nowadays. No one is saying that we have to progress by improving education or improving institutions. Not a single politician is saying that. Why? Because we are reacting and we are, reflecting or vibrating with these extreme statements. Yes, on the back.
I'm just wondering if there is any conception of like an economic path forward, right? Because like suppose even if Guaido does take over and the military backs him and there's like a transition of government, there's still these huge economic problems where like they have huge oil-denominated loans, and then the imports like food and medicine, which you were talking about, are unaffordable. So like what is the path forward to address those things, even if there is a transition of government, if there is one?
See, no, yeah. I think, yes. No, I think there's a path forward. So in summary, but it's kind of an opinion. Is that okay? So this will be my opinion. My opinion is you have the demand side, which is the consumer side, has a lot of distortions on prices, and I don't think that they can afford fixing those distortions in the short run. So the way I will work is to first fix the supply side. Get management contracts to produce electricity, get someone to produce actual water, get food in the stands, and get medicine somewhere. So work on the supply side, either by imports, and so I free the supply side to produce more, but I will continue subsidizing my consumers. So slowly the wages cramp up, and as the wages go up, then I can start adjusting the prices slowly. But what that means is that I need a massive amount of resources to finance that transaction. because that means that implicitly I'm subsidizing 40% of the Venezuelan population. So I need, of course, loans. I mean, again, if I were to do it, I need loans from the IMF and the World Bank that believe that this is a strategy. So in other words, I will take like a shock strategy on the supply side, but a very gradual strategy on the demand side. So I will fix all the distortions. Let me explain you. I mean, the lowest currency of denomination, the lowest coin in Venezuela buys 40 full tanks of SUVs. So let me so you would realize the lowest coin, the smallest coin, like 1 cent in the United States, when you give that to the guy at the gas station, you're actually purchasing 40 full tanks of gasoline. So you understand that what happens in Venezuela is you just get there, they put gasoline, and then they say, give me whatever you want. And if you don't want to give me something, go, it's okay. Because I only need 1 car every 40 to give me the smallest coin. So 1 egg is 15,000 SUV tanks. 1 iPhone is 15.7 million full tanks. So do you understand that it's a little bit subsidized? So electricity, you don't pay electricity. You understand in my country you don't pay electricity? You just get electricity. Now, what is happening is that you don't get electricity. So you pay for what you have. So you get only 2 hours of electricity if you're lucky. So there are massive distortions on the supply side. The only way to fix that is that we have to adjust the relative prices so companies can start producing, rice and apple and very small things, medicine. But by adjusting the prices there, I cannot afford to adjust the prices on the other side. Have to be gradual. Is that okay? That will be kind of my summary of my plan.
Yeah. Does that entail like the privatization of those things?
Oh, no privatization now. No. Imagine how much will you pay today for something that will give you for sure losses? You will pay 0. Second, can you imagine if the total rhetoric of this government has been that the private sector is your enemy and that the Americans are here to invade you, and now we're going to create, when we take cover, the first thing we do is we sell to 2 American companies, the whole country. How long do you understand? I don't make it to next Friday. So no privatization on mine. I will I think the private sector has to play an incredibly important role, but we will do that by reactivating the supply side, and implicitly will be privatized by making the government smaller, not necessarily by selling the assets. We cannot afford to sell the assets until we recover something. Is that okay? Oh, no. In fact, if you heard the word privatization, you misunderstood me.
I think there's time for one more question.
Yes, one question, yes.
So we were just in Cucuta this spring break to do with your art project there, and one of the things that really stood out were the burned trucks with the humanitarian aid, the original trucks, on the bridge. And we heard different stories about what those trucks mean. And one of the stories that we heard was that the U.S., because it was U.S. aid, sent those trucks there not necessarily to get the trucks in, but just to make a big spectacle out of it, that the trucks were rejected, and humanitarian aid is rejected. And with that, humanitarian aid is being politicized, which puts a lot of humanitarian organizations in a difficult position. And I was wondering what you think.
Oh, it's horrible. Yes, in fact, yes, I got it. See, she doesn't even need all these things, you see. Oh, beautiful. Okay, she has all these like 10 minutes, 2 minutes. So she has not shown a single one. Is that okay? I teach in the Sloan school. We are trained to do this. So the question is about the politicization of the humanitarian help. You're absolutely correct. This was completely and absolutely it's a horrible use of humanitarian help. Like, if people are dying, then you send a truck. You don't tell people where the truck is gonna come. Like, who cares you send the truck. Send the food, send the boat. By the way, it was not only the trucks, it was the boats from Puerto Rico, that was actually worse. So, truly, it was politicized completely. In fact, if you see what the opposition did, it was a horrible mistake. They have a concert the previous day with 200,000 people in concert. It's like, oh, everybody dancing, whoa! And then the following day, only 2 guys show up for the trucks. So totally misused. And again, why on earth humanitarian help has to be politicized? If it's humanitarian help, it doesn't matter. It's the whole point. So I agree with you that it was misused. Now, the government has all the incentives not to allow the trucks to come in. You understand that as well. So this is actually politicized on both sides. But I think the opposition made a mistake. There's no reason why to have a concert first. Why a concert? Explain me that. If this is humanitarian help, only you are collecting money, but then the concert doesn't have to happen in Cucuta. It can happen in any place. In fact, if you really want money, let's do that in New York. Are you kidding me? Like, why Cucuta? When you think about it, if they were doing the concert to get money, then they did it in the wrong place. If you want the concert to capture attention, then you did it the right way. But then the humanitarian help should not be to capture attention. Then you're conditioned that help for that. Now the Venezuelans are truly dying. So I don't want to actually minimize that aspect. So Colombia is spending 0.5% of their GDP just on health of Venezuelans. 0.5%. That's one tax reform for Colombia just to help Venezuelans arriving to the border. Spain is spending a huge amount of money just receiving 500,000 Venezuelans. Miami has 500,000 Venezuelans. Panama has about 400,000. Argentina about 400,000. Chile about 200,000. So these people are living not because they are going to an MBA. These people are living and working in any type of work. So the humanitarian aspect is a serious one. So to me, politicizing both sides was a mistake. Absolutely correct. So that was a horrible mistake. Again, I think that both sides are on this fight, and in these fights, there's no winners. It's very unfortunate. These are 2 drunk guys in a bar trying to show how tough they are, and the way to show how tough they are is by actually cutting their own fingers. That's exactly what we're doing. We're just and then the population is paying dearly for this. We need a change, and we need your support. So if there's something you can do, yes, you can. And call your senator, call your representative, and tell them that this is serious, and that the United States has to pay attention to this seriously. To put aside any politics, this is actually humanitarian help. And if we wait to use data, the way we measure human rights violations is by waiting until you find 200,000 people dead in the street. I think that is the definition of measuring too late. I would love to be able to take actions before that. If we wait until there's 200,000 people dead in the streets, well, then guess what? We are going to actually need a military intervention. And then what I don't want to be the solution, it will be. Because then we will just put ourselves in a situation that will be the only one. I do think that there's hope. So I don't want to end on a completely negative call. I really hope that China and Russia understand what their role is in the solution, that they also have a lot to lose if this transition is violent, because the people that are going to take over in Venezuela afterwards, they're going to remember what was the support that China and Russia gave. So I hope that actually everyone of the international community understand that they need to be part of the solution, that this is not about the right or the left, that it's a time to actually think about all the humanitarian abuses that are taking place. Good. Thank you so much for coming. It's a great pleasure.